Of course, my enthusiasm for NTDs or neglected tropical diseases stems from more than 25 years in the meantime of work with filarial diseases, something I took with me when I left from the Hamburg Bernhard Nocht Institute of Tropical Medicine to become chair of parasitology and then later of microbiology and parasitology in Bonn. And since our grant income, so to speak, always would drive us continuously further into tropical disease research, we kept this momentum over the last years. And so I could observe long developments already from beginning of elimination programs that were really only very specific for filarial diseases or even one disease only, into something that now means much more, NTD control programs, or even their further integration into other activities of One Health or global health, as we see. We have already heard about the Institute. This is the new building we have at the University Hospital campus in Bonn. And now let's start with a little overview over the neglected tropical diseases. You can go to the WHO websites and Google them. And here you see the ones that are in the current portfolio. I think this is rather up to date. And some of them really infect a lot of people, particularly the ones in the upper left: soil transmitted helminth infection, lymphatic filariasis, onco, schistosomiasis. They affect more than 1.5 billion altogether, and the biggest share is really these four. And these four plus trachoma have been grouped together as some diseases that are preventable by chemotherapy, because transmission cycles can be broken. And one of the aspects that I want to elucidate today is how these rather public health aspects, mass drug treatments and so on, will gradually transcend to more personal medicine. Medicine not for neglected diseases, but medicine for neglected people. And I think this is also a big aspect that we need to be aware of in our discussions on global health. So as I said, the table can always be looked upon other websites. You don't need to memorize all that, but you should know that there are some that are amenable to preventive chemotherapy. Others, for example, leishmania or Buruli ulcer. I can show you maybe what Buruli ulcer means. These mycobacterial disease that leads to large, really bad ulcers. You have to diagnose them, if possible, much earlier than at this stage. So this means active case finding, and this can only be by innovative intensified disease management. So IDM was a buzzword that the WHO introduced a couple of years ago. And of course, then you have other, depending on the particular diseases, you have other measures. Some are veterinary, if you have a zoonosis. Others are vector control, if the disease is transmitted by vectors, by flying insects or ticks. And of course, many are transmitted by unhygienic conditions. So safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene is key additional element for intervention. Now, NTDs have not always been mentioned like that. This is an old slide, more than 20 years old. People are still alive and a bit older than at that time, but they were really the champions of the term neglected tropical diseases. And why was that introduced? It was sort of a counterweight to the big three diseases: malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis, who got a lot of attention and a lot of funding. And these neglected ones, people felt they are too disseminated. There are lots of diseases, and we need some sort of joint portfolio in order to make the case for investments, business cases, and so on. So the three were not alone. There were lots of others from WHO, other big global health initiatives, Gates Foundation. And in the end, the term NTD was born, and it had quite some success over time. So you can also, as I said, in the World Health Organization, you can read for all of them, and you can also read programmatic innovations. There are some joint features of entities. As the name says, they are neglected, and of course, neglect comes in usually from I think, sorry, there is someone who wants to enter. Can I do that, or can you do that? Oh, okay.
Thanks, I let them in.
Okay, so welcome. And they maybe if we go to the map down there, it says the more blue the country is, more the poorer it is. So in Central Africa, usually there are the poorest countries. South Sudan is not white because it's rich, but because there are no data, and the same color is if you look how many of these neglected tropical diseases are prevalent in the country. So it's a map that has very many similarities. So the poorer, in principle, the more NTDs. And why is that so? It's because the NTDs are basically all preventable and treatable, but the health systems are not strong enough to and don't have enough money to really tackle them. And therefore, of course, Europe, also richer Asian countries, the US and the English-speaking countries like Australia, Canada, and so on, they are doing big funding in order to make the situation better. But as we will learn in a few minutes, also the endemic countries need to organize themselves in order to really eliminate the diseases. And this is a target that the World Society, represented, if you wish, by the World Health Organization, has set for the next 10 years. So in figures, more than 1 in 5 people worldwide are affected by NTDs. A big burden is sub-Saharan Africa, not the largest burden. This may be surprising, but simply because a lot of poor people also live in Asian countries that have a poor population. For example, India, Indonesia, and other countries that have a billion, more than 1 billion of people, and this makes this part of the cake rather large. And the other thing is that very little money can bring about a lot of change. So 50 cents, as it's written here, can fund treatment per person, obviously, for the 5 most common NTDs for a full year. This full year is funny in that respect, as usually it is a 1-day yearly treatment. So, but at least you have to take it once every year, but this altogether doesn't cost more than 50 cents. So it should be doable, but still there are lots of hurdles. So this slide here comes again, just to focus a little bit on those with preventive chemotherapy. And there is the nice situation that a lot of this chemotherapy is donated, among others also by German companies like Merck in Darmstadt with the warm or anti-schisto drug, praziquantel. There is Bayer in Germany funding a lot, and there are others, for example, Merck Serono in the US funding drugs against filariasis, Glaxo funding albendazole for a lot of helminths, so, and Pfizer funding azithromycin. So these are some of the biggest donors, because the preventive chemotherapy diseases are the ones which affect most people and where most drugs are being delivered. But, and this is also important for all considerations for One Health, drugs alone do not make it. And a very good example is schistosoma mansoni. So you can give drugs and you will kill the worms, but you get reinfected. And this is due to an infectious cycle that is very efficient. So if you defecate, for example, if you're a kid, you don't want to go to the toilet, you sit next to Lake Victoria, so you jump in the water and you defecate. So then you will, in your faces, there will be eggs that will have a larva, a miracidium hatch, and this one tries to meet snails, and the snails sit in non-flowing water, so for example, a lake, like Lake Victoria. And if then, I took this picture when going out of this boat on a transfer to a little island, and all these people had dry feet, but this one is washing the bicycle. And obviously then even through intact skin, so you don't need to have wounds, these Cercaria can enter the skin and a new cycle starts. So as long as you don't break that, you can, of course, pump millions of tablets every year into Africa, but the schistosomiasis will not be eliminated. It may be reduced, and very bad cases with destroyed liver and liver cirrhosis and early death will be avoided, but you won't get rid of it. And particularly difficult, of course, in Lake Victoria, because here you have 3 countries, Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, that need to work together, because the snails don't really care whether they are controlled by Kenya or by Tanzania. They will migrate to the other part if there is no combined control through all nations. But what you also need is a toilet, so that you can educate these kids to use the toilet and not the lake. And I have seen a little community at Lake Victoria that had built the NGOs had built some toilets. But then there was, it was not really thought till the end or funded till the end. There was no water pipes because the toilet was intended to be a dry toilet. But then you need toilet paper. And of course you can provide toilet paper, but at some point the provision will end. And then the toilet will be useless because no one's going to buy new toilet paper because all people are used to use water. So you can see how important, for example, understanding by the population, dissemination of your philosophy behind is, and other communities have learned. And for example, there is a water tank donated by, it should read German taxpayer, it reads German people, it's rather close, that there is water from rain, no? And this water can be used, of course, for hygiene, also for hand washing. The other ones are that is an example that medicine alone is not enough, that cycles have to be broken. Involvement of veterinary medicine. Now, take the pig tapeworm. So humans have those little things here. The longest I've ever seen in a photo is 15 meters, is a tapeworm in human gut. And it breaks down into these little parts, the so-called proglottides, and they are full of eggs. So if people defecate somewhere where swine can sniff it up, it will get eggs, and the eggs will then form a new head of a new worm that is in such a cyst everywhere in the tissue. So this is pig meat that would not be for sale in Europe, but is for sale sometimes on some markets. And you can still eat it, but you have to cook it before. Otherwise, these cysts will form a new tapeworm with you, and sometimes these little proglottides will open up and the eggs will hatch in your body, and then you will look like the swine. And this looks from outside like this. These are these cysts in the back. They are rather harmless there, but if they are in the brain, you can have epilepsy, a preventable infectious epilepsy. So it's more than medicine. This I wanted to bring over. And also with filaria. Now we stick to filaria. It's very important that, of course, you have a vector, and you can do a lot of vector control. This is now coming back as some of the interventions because the mass drug administration was very successful. Well, why was it successful? If you take the cycle, you have a mosquito, or by river blindness is a fly, the black fly, that donates during the blood meal an L3, an infective larvae, to you. And from the larvae, they will within 1 year develop a worm that can be almost half a meter long in the case of onchocerciasis, and sits in these nodules or in the lymphatic filarial, in the lymphatics in the case of lymphatic filariasis. And the offspring are either in the skin with river blindness, or in the eye, making you blind, or in the blood. And the next mosquito comes and picks it up. So what you can do, what you can currently do, is use combination or the major drug ivermectin to kill the larvae. So you could break the cycle, but the problem is the worms live very long and they will starting again producing larvae. So after a couple of months, the person that has been taking the pill will get new worms, so the cycle can go on. So it's very important that you have a high coverage in the population and that you repeat it quite often, because otherwise you don't really control the disease. And this has been part of the problem over the years, that the progress was slower than anticipated. Some people, or many people, will not have many disease symptoms or not get blind, just have the worms. Same with lymphatic filariasis, but some get the disease, like disturbances of the lymphatic flow that can lead to disfigurement of genitals, also with women, the labia, for example, and the thick legs called the elephantiasis. So just a few clinical pictures. So you can palpate these worm nodules in river blindness at several parts of the body. They are painless. So this man didn't even know that he had worms here in the shoulder. And you can move them, so different to maybe a swollen lymph node, and it's still not painful. But here you can detect it. And these worms can live, as I said, for 10 to 15 years. And you can operate, and in former times this was the major curative intervention, operate the nodules, and you have as many as a few dozens of these female and male, they are smaller here, worms that you can, if you dissolve the nodule in collagenase, you can get out and do your whatever biochemical molecular studies and maybe define new targets for new treatments and so on. The major mass examination is the little larvae in the skin. And this film should also start automatically. Seems it does not. Maybe it does. Yeah, no. So you take a little punch, not too deep, so no blood if possible. And then you put it into a saline solution. And then after a while, the microfilaria, they swarm out, and you can watch this under the microscope. So it looks like this. And you, of course, can quickly see them. The problem is if there are too many, you cannot count. And sometimes in such a little snip, you have 100 or more of these little worm larvae. So you can extrapolate how many worm larvae people might have in their skin. So with the drug ivermectin that Merck pledged to donate in '87, it comes from veterinary medicine, but is useful for human use. Something started that was not seen before, and this is called mass drug administration. So you go to a village as a program officer of the National Control Program. You inform the population, you have everybody eligible, take the necessary amount of pills, and necessary is defined by your BMI, by your index, body mass index, and this is approximated by your height, and this is a stick usually in every community. It says 1 tablet, 2 tablets, 3 tablets, depending on your height. And there are, of course, some people that are too young and others are too old. The drug and the inventors of the drug, developers of the drug, have received the 2015 Nobel Prize, not only for making the drug, but as I pointed out at that time in interviews, the big idea was really to donate the surplus from veterinary medicine to humans. Merck, of course, needed to dominate the market with ivermectin for veterinary use. And if you want to dominate the market, you always have to be ready to sell. So you have to have a surplus. You can't count on the individual tablet. So the idea was our surplus that we don't use, we can actually donate for humans. And we can withdraw it from our balances, tax exemptions, and so on. This is a model that has since then really developed for a lot of entities. Here again, you see the tables, your weight and the tablets, or your height and the tablets. So this little kid is too young because he can't reach the ear of the opposite side. And this girl needs 2 tablets. And it was Dr. Eric Ottesen. He's now already in his 80s, but still active in Atlanta in the Task Force for Global Health. A long time advisor to the Bernhard Nocht Institute. So we awarded him the Bernhard Nocht Medal. And he was the first to really set up for lymphatic filariasis these programs. And one cornerstone was also not only to have Merck on board, but also GSK for a second drug, namely albendazole, which was needed for an optimum acceptance in the population for lymphatic filariasis. It doesn't really help a lot for against the filariasis worms, but it helps people feel better because it affects also the worms in the guts. And this is what people mainly feel. Very often with lymphatic filariasis, they don't feel the improvement. So having NTDs as a trademark, having a first control program successfully in place, then stakeholders, and was very much driven by the Gates Foundation, convened in London to make the London Declaration on Neglected Tropical Diseases. And you see what they want to do. They wanted in 2012 to eliminate 4 NTDs and control 5 by 2020. So they didn't arrive quite there in 2020. So we have now a new roadmap by the WHO that runs until 2030. But it was at least the first big global event. This is also something without, I think, global health is not thinkable, that there are global stakeholders and global networks working together in order to really eliminate global programs. Global diseases, sorry. And so these were the 4 and the 5 to eliminate and to control. What means control versus eliminate? Control is a rather flexible term. And of course, you can say control is remaining prevalence of 1% or 2% or 3%. So there is some flexibility. Control you more or less always achieve, but elimination really says there's no transmission going on. The disease is really zero in a certain area. This is hard facts, and this was not really reached. So there were also other stakeholders like the Gates-funded Uniting to Combat, so a non-government organizations club for many, like Christopher Blind Mission or other also from the Muslim world stakeholders trying to unify their activities. And they did one thing, they also counted success. So they counted how many drugs did we actually deliver, and so they could show that there was an increase after the advent of the London Declaration, and this continued until Corona. Actually, then there was a little dip. And they defined something very new for WHO at that time, scorecards. So success and achievement cards. So where there's red, there is still really a big delay towards the program goals, and action needs to be taken. Green is rather more or less on track. And so there are not only Bill Gates, but also in the Arab world, there are people who are very rich and who made considerable donations in order to help WHO achieve their programs. Now, they have set up a new map for neglected tropical diseases. And the idea of having figures and not only yes, no, we want to eliminate yes or no. Now, there are quantitative figures. This is very important for their milestones. So, for example, 75% reduction in disability adjusted life years, 100 countries having eliminated at least one neglected tropical disease, and so on. This is something you can measure, and you can say, okay, if 90 countries only have eliminated one disease, and there's a 90% success, but it's not a non-success. No? So that's the idea. And another very important thing introduced by the late Moelle Malicella, who was program director for NTDs in the last years before, unfortunately, she died from cancer, was also the country ownership. So why country ownership? Because it was becoming clear that without the endemic country and their health services being part of the team, you won't get anywhere by just drug donation. This is very important, but you have also to have the distribution at the end. You have to get the data clear, how many you actually reached. And there is another thing, and this is also the disease sequelae that are not covered by drug donations. So similar to the London Declaration, helping the WHO roadmap in the 2010 decade, now we have the Kigali Summit that helps enable the WHO roadmap till 2030. And WHO does its World NTD Day every year, end of January. And in Germany, we have a network, the Deutsches Netzwerk gegen vernachlässigte Tropenkrankheiten, or DNTDs, where we try to bring politicians together to understand the problem and, of course, commit the German government. And we were lucky in 2022 to have a virtual meeting at that time because of Corona, to get the state secretary in the BMZ, the Bundesministerium für Zusammenarbeit, to commit to sign the Kigali Declaration rather early. And so did other nations. And in the end, this event, it was a Commonwealth event. This is why then Prince, now King Charles, was present together with Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, and of course, the Director General of WHO and others, Melinda Gates here. They committed to really some substantial commitments, like 1.5 billion financial value and a lot of billions of committed tablets. And again, the figures that I just read from the WHO, they are just taken one by one, 100% of countries reducing, eliminating at least one NTD. So we have the WHO roadmap, the Kigali commitments, and we have another tool, and this is the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is SDG goal 3.8, and this sounds very, very trivial, universal health coverage. Okay, everyone should have health coverage, but what does it mean for an endemic country? It means that you don't have to pay out-of-pocket payments, and this was something really very often underscored by Mwele Malicella from WHO. You should not pay, for example, if you have elephantiasis due to lymphatic filariasis. There's no tablet helping you against that, so there's no donation made, but the endemic, your own country should then set up the health service, for example, to implement foot hygiene that can help your legs in early stages to reduce the swelling, and in later stages at least not to further progress. And this is something that costs the local government money, and this is something now WHO is trying to implement, at least with the more wealthy countries, that they take it up, stand as an example for the poorer countries to follow them over the time. Of course, Germany is also committed. They are funding African research networks, and there is one that was funded for my institution together with the Munich Topical Institute and 3 African partners, and part of that was to deal with these disease sequelae. And we found quite some important studies that were interesting to WHO for revision of the lymphedema management guideline. I don't go into more details. It's what I just said. With stringent hygiene, you can reduce at least the beginning lymphedema, like this one here, into something that is almost non-existent. And this is, of course, hope for the population, but it needs either very stringent hygiene or it needs doxycycline tablets. I don't go into more details. You can, if you want, read the science to that. And now the second, and I will not have many more slides because you want to discuss with me, is, of course, you may have already thought about that. Why do we only tackle the larvae when there are the adult worms that live for 10 years in the human body? What we need would be drugs that kill the adult worms. This is easy said, but difficult done, because if you kill the adult worms, you may get a huge of toxicity, because it's not so easy to kill a eukaryotic organism without side effects. And even if there is a way and the worm dies quickly, then you have an allergic reaction. So you need something that does the job slowly but steadily. And of course, development of drugs needs time and also money. First, you need to convince funders, and one was that with ivermectin, only drug treatment with ivermectin. In many cases, if you do that over 10 or 15 years, you will always reduce the microfilarial load, then they go back and they come, and you reduce the next year. So over 10 years, you gradually reduce the microfilarial level in a village. But there will be out of, I think, what the public health people in Rotterdam did, almost 100,000 simulations of village size, village average age, closeness to the water, where the vectors breed, and so on. There are about 15% scenarios where this treatment will fail and the microfilaria will come back. And so in the end, you need treatment against the adult worms. Otherwise, we'll not meet roadmap 2030 criteria in most of Africa, because many countries will just take longer. These are very conservative assessments. And so in the end, the Gates Foundation set up new drug development programs, and the core of it is tackling these little bacteria inside the worm. So this is you remember the worms from the nodules in the beginning. This is such a adult worm which has a body wall, which has, as a female worm, 2 uterus branches and some other structures here. And there's a lot of endobacteria that serve similar to mitochondria for the worm's well-being and fertility. And if you can treat them with drugs, for example, rifampicin and doxycycline was the prototype drug that we already did 20 years ago. And if you treat a patient, then the worm looks like this: no endobacteria like here, and also the uteri are empty. So doxycycline is already being used since 10 years or longer, but it takes 4 to 6 weeks for a treatment success. And the programs wanted this success to come more quickly, in 1 week or 2 weeks at the latest. So this is, as I said, doxycycline textbook knowledge. And the Gates Foundation decided to use this treatment principle because it is scalable for the big drug screenings. And this is because insect cell lines also have these little endobacteria by the name of Wolbachia. And you can seed these insect cells by large in multi well plates and analyze them by the 100,000s. And you see, you can stain the Wolbachia and you have a green impression. And if this is lacking, then you are successful. And so this was automated, done at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, where the former president, Molyneux, that I showed you on this first slide with the 3 old people, he was actually behind that and convinced the Gates Foundation to do that. And they had a business plan starting with 500,000 drugs. So this is when you talk about new drugs. I found an interesting drug and I want to make it into a medicine. This will usually not work. You have to start with a huge lot of compounds, of which you will down select the largest majority. So if you have 500,000 compounds and you end up with 1 or 2 in clinics, then you are lucky. Very often you end up with 0, because you have a lot of attrition. Some of them will be toxic, some of them will be too costly to produce, and so on. Some of them will not survive animal screens or animal toxicity. And in the end, you have very few. But this project was really funded with big money. We were happy to be part of it in several stages, in the preclinical stage and now in clinical stages. And it ended up, you see here, 500,000 compounds. So we did in Bonn about 400 or 500 in a mouse model. These were all the companies that were working together, that the Gates Foundation called together. And now we are in the clinics with 3 and 1 that is produced by the German Center for Infectious Disease to come hopefully in 2024. So these are already in phase 2, and we are already analyzing nodules operated from patients to see whether they work. They should work. This one will follow next year. This one may follow, but it has a toxicity issue in phase 1, so we will see what happens. But at least we are not talking here like sort of DreamWorks, we should have a drug, we'd like a drug. We really had these programs running for 15 years, and this is what it takes. It takes a long time until you really have a drug, and it, of course, needs a lot of funding commitment. And therefore, this funding commitment does not come just as an idea. It's a real business plan where a lot of people work to see whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense. So this is how these studies look like. You've already seen me palpating. So these nodules will be operated under sterile conditions and cut into slices and then analyzed by histology. So what we hope is that in 1 or 2 years, we end all the drugs that I've shown you in phase 2. Maybe we get phase 3 done in the second part of this decade, and we hope by the end of this decade to have at least one registered that is then able to kill the worms safely, but with a 7 to 10 days regimen. And this then will mean automatically that the focus from mass drug treatment goes to individual treatment, because you cannot register a drug for mass drug treatment. First, these are just the rules. You have to register it for individual treatment. And we want to get also a curative drug. Really want to make sure with universal health coverage with SDG 3.8 and say, okay, we want to deliver a curative regimen, and alongside individual care. You remember the slide with the soap for the elephantiasis. And only these two arms of it will eventually eliminate filariasis. Otherwise, you can reduce it, you can, if you wish, call it control, but you will not eliminate it. And this brings me to the final slide. I was asked to get to pin down my ideas of global health research. So it's probably not complete, but at least there are a few points. So, of course, working on diseases that have a global impact, and this I think is true for most of the NTDs. And you have to do it not on your own and not on your whatever country, but you need a global network of stakeholders to really elucidate all the different facets. And you need global funders. And need not a single country, you need a global funder, or you need a better, just to talk about a global network of funders. So I really would think funders need to also form a network and fund complementary things that can even reach further. Of course, you need global health research needs to support global institutions. For example, needs to deliver deliverables for guidelines for WHO, for example. And of course, it has aspects of this global society, and this means also beyond medicine. We're coming back to hygiene, water, also equal access to medicines for men and women. There's a big problem in some countries, and all these aspects. So I hope I have at least touched a few issues. I'm a bit over time, sorry for that. I have to thank a lot of people for the big networks that we have been able to create with a lot of funders, and I'm looking forward for your breakout sessions that bring about a few interesting questions, I hope. Thank you very much. Yeah, and you see that I'm working for more than 20 years. This was at the beginning, and now this is over time where people like me grow older. But it's very rewarding to be able to do that and to deliver new medicines for people. Thank you very much.